It is time for Toolbox Tuesdays. This week, our session is on club secretary and club treasurer. These are two key roles for all of our clubs. And to lead our training this week, we're lucky to have our District 106 lead training coordinator, distinguished Toastmaster, Joanna Carley. I need not say more. Joanna, I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Thanks, Dave. For tonight, as Dave said, we're going to cover the treasurer and secretary roles. Both of these roles are critical to the success of the team because they help with some of the administrative functions, and they help to make sure that both new members and existing members get what they need to be successful. So, to get started, I'm going to share my screen. And if you've been through one of my trainings on here before, you'll know that when I want to find out about what a club officer does, I will always go to the Toastmasters International site and I will search Club Officer Handbook. My little Zoom screen is in my way. Because this way I always get the most up-to-date information, and I can quickly go in here, and I don't want Portuguese or Spanish, but I can quickly go down to somewhere in here, the one that doesn't specify a language, and download it, so I can always get what I need right here. And so all of our information that we're sharing tonight is also information that you can see in the Club Leadership Handbook. If I scroll down, again, this is why I love the electronic version so much, I can scroll down until I find the table of contents, and I look to find my club leadership role. Tonight, we're going to start with treasurer, and so you can just click on treasurer in the table of contents, and it will take you directly to that portion of the information. So if you are a treasurer, you want to go into here, and there's just a couple of pages that let you know all of the duties that the treasurer owns. If you are the secretary, you can do exactly the same thing, but you'd want to do it for the secretary role. This is a really quick and easy way to get all of the base information about what's important for your officer role. However, for ease, I put it into a PowerPoint so I can go through the information a little more quickly with each of you. Oops. We're going to put out our first quiz right now. So Dave is going to set up that first quiz for us. And I'll have each of you select an answer for this question. What is the function of the treasurer? Is it to prepare and manage the club budget? Is it to report on the club budget? Is it to manage the club bank account, or all of the above? Go ahead and start polling now. You can each select one option. And let's review what the answers showed us. We had someone answer all of the above. Bingo, very correct. Perfect. The roles of the treasurer are to prepare and manage the club budget, report on the club budget at club officer or business meetings, could be both depending on your club. Manage the club bank account. This includes managing deposits and paying out expenses. File tax information if required, which I think in Minnesota, I could be wrong, but I believe in Minnesota we don't have any clubs that require this, or in Ontario. And then the final role for the treasurer is to transfer club financial information to the incoming treasurer. As you would expect, as you move off of the transition from being the treasurer to another club member, you want to make sure that they have the necessary information that they need. This is a little bit different than the other officer roles because it's not just about sharing information about the club with the new incoming treasurer, but it's also that you ensure that they have access to the club's bank account in whatever bank your club is using, and making sure that they have access to things like checks or debit cards as well. One of the biggest challenges of being the treasurer is preparing and managing the club budget. This includes collecting membership dues payments, TI and club dues, if any. And then not only do you have to collect those Toastmasters International dues, you need to then ensure that Toastmasters International receives those dues in a timely manner. So for September dues that are due, we say sometimes that they're October dues, but really they're due the very last day of the month of September. So it's important that the treasurer not only is able to get the dues from the members, but is also able to make sure that those payments then get sent on to Toastmasters International. In addition, if your club does collect any dues for the club, as the treasurer, you are expected to manage that budget, which includes being able to pay any bills outstanding and be able to report back to the actual club in business meetings or in club officer meetings to ensure that you're accountable for all of the incoming money and all of the outgoing expenses. It's very important as a treasurer that you are comfortable handling the finances, that you are a trustworthy person, and that you are able to track and communicate all of the financial outlays for the club. In between here, we have one quick question. This is more for curiosity than anything. And Dave, if you could pull up the second poll, I'm curious whether clubs collect club dues on top of Toastmasters International dues. So go ahead and choose one, either yes, no, or maybe you don't know. We had somebody answer yes, and I'm not allowed to vote, but my clubs all collect dues on top of the Toastmasters International dues as well. So I would add that into the bucket. If your club does collect dues on top of Toastmasters International dues, it is important to consider that Toastmasters is a nonprofit organization, and as such, Toastmasters International encourages clubs to not hold a ton of money within their banking accounts. You should have the money that you need to be able to run your club, to be able to pay for things like rent if needed, to pay for things like membership packets, maybe incentives for club members or for guests as they come into the club. But if you have a large sum of money, you may consider actually reducing the amount of club dues, or perhaps foregoing the club dues for a short or longer amount of time if they're not needed anymore. If you are a club that does not collect club dues, and you also find that you need some financial substance to be able to create things like membership packets or guest incentives, you do have the option of charging club dues. That must be agreed on within your club. So that needs to be voted on, it needs to be discussed, and we need to ensure that it is agreed upon by a majority of the members within the club. That concludes the treasurer portion, and we'll move on to the secretary. Before we move on to the next slide, I want to pop up a little quiz about what the secretary's responsibilities are. So if we can start polling, I'll ask you what the functions of the secretary are. Is it to maintain club records, act as backup Basecamp manager, create and send out club newsletters, or is it to maintain club records and act as backup Basecamp manager, or maintain club records and create and send out club newsletters? Somebody is scoring fantastically on these quizzes today. Yes, A and B, maintain club records, including officer lists and minutes, and act as backup Basecamp manager for the VP of Education. But that's not all that the secretary does. They also ensure that officer lists and minutes are up to date, and they handle club correspondence. This can vary quite a bit depending on what your club does. In some clubs, the secretary provides detailed minutes of every single meeting, and in some cases, it may be nothing more than including the minutes in the business meetings on a quarterly or bi-monthly basis from the officer meetings. Club correspondence can vary depending on your location. For example, in my home club, we sent a card at every Christmas to be able to give people sense of thanks and gratitude for what they were getting out of the Toastmasters experience. In addition, and this is a new requirement, is with Pathways, the secretary acts as a backup for the Basecamp manager, who is your vice president education. Now, the Basecamp manager default is the vice president of education. However, the president and the secretary also have access to Basecamp manager. So for whatever reason, if your VP of education is unable to or unwilling to manage the Basecamp, work with them together to ensure that all of your members get what they need. What does this look like? Well, this could be things like approving requests for outside speeches. It could be verifying educational levels attained and tracking education themselves. If your VP of education is doing those tasks, you may only be a backup for, say, when your VP of education is out on vacation. VP education is responsible to be the Basecamp manager, but the secretary and president should have some awareness of how to manage the Basecamp so that they can also cover that role. In addition, some of the most important things that the secretary can do is maintaining club records. This includes submitting the officer list to Toastmasters International after your officer elections, but before June 30th, the end of the Toastmasters year. And this also includes recording the minutes of meetings, especially officer meetings or any business meetings. This is where your secretary should be recording things like the treasurer's report, as well as any budget changes, and any ideas or concepts that your officers or your entire club have voted on. And it's so very important to keep a record of those decisions made and why and when they're made. I think one of the biggest things, though, is that submitting your officer list to TI after officer elections. It's so important that you submit your officer list before the end of the Toastmasters year. Typically, clubs should be holding their elections at the first meeting after the 1st of May. So you have about 2 months in order to get your officers in line and then start putting them into the system. It takes about 10 minutes to do, and it's a very important piece in order to ensure that everything is transitioning over from old officers into new officers. At this point, we'll open it up for whatever questions are out there. Okay.
All right, we have a question from Mike Overland.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys hear me?
Hey,
I
Mike.
can hear you.
Hey, guys. My question is with treasurers and budgets, does the district have any recommended resources for creating budgets and training treasurers to do that? I've noticed that in my clubs in the past, traditionally, budgets just don't happen. And so nobody expects it. Nobody knows what to do.
What I've researched, I have not seen any resources such as templates in order to create budgets. What's in the club officer handbook gives us direction in terms of tracking it and start to put out what your expected outlays are, and that's really the most detail that it goes into. Dave, I don't know if you have any more experience or any other resources that would be helpful.
Mike, that's an excellent question. I'm going to do a little bit of looking, and I will not only respond to you personally with the answer, but when we post this video, I will put links on this video. I will put them in right here at this spot so that we can answer that question. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much.
Hey, Joanna, I don't have a question, but something that struck me as you were talking about the treasurer and the responsibility of collecting the dues.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that we might not be thinking about, we've been in Toastmasters for quite a while, and sometimes we get that level of comfort that there is some more time, that we have a grace period. And with pathways, there is no grace period. And if we come around to April 1st and your dues are not paid, you lose access to pathways, which is something that you want to be cognizant of if you are your club's treasurer, to make sure if you're serving your clubs that you can get those, you can get that covered and keep them active in the program.
I didn't realize it actually shut off your access if you didn't have your dues paid on time. So as treasurer, I think part of the responsibility then is to make sure that people know that that's the case too.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, we've got another question from Mike. Mike, you can unmute.
I've got another one. I do have another one here. Joanna, you had mentioned with the secretary at the end of the year getting the officers list in, and it is quite easy. I don't want to discourage people from doing it. I'm just wondering if the district has a position, because as an area director, I know there were clubs as I was coming in that were not getting their new officers elected. It is possible to submit that list with the existing officers if they haven't voted for new ones. Is that something the district is okay with? Or would you rather them not submit? So what I'm talking about is it's June 25th. The club hasn't had officer elections yet. Submit the existing officers and let them know they're continuing on until they get new officers elected, or tell them don't submit it until you actually have the new officers.
I'd like to answer that one. I think that is, well, that's not desirable. We'd like you to have your officer list in beforehand. It is important to have a method to reach out. And when the new area directors come in, they need someone to reach out to. So it would be better to have your new officer list in, and that is the expectation. If you don't, and you ran with your old officers and then did an election in July, keep in mind that at least for the legacy program, you've got a 6-month term. So don't be 7 months late in submitting your officers. Otherwise, they don't get credit. But
right. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah. Next week, we're going to be talking about vice president membership. And so that's another officer role. Make sure you pass on to your club members and let them know that if they couldn't make tonight's webinar, they will be posted up on the D106 website. Thanks everyone for coming out. This has been Toolbox Tuesday. We'll see you next week.